All right, everyone. Welcome to our live stream. Today we have an amazing guest in our talk show. Joseph O'Connor decided to participate and share his wisdom and his 30 years, probably even more, kind of experience of training and developing people in the area of psychology, neurolinguistic programming, and so on, so on. So I'm gonna just quickly introduce Joseph O'Connor is the director of ICC, International Coaching Community, which is, I believe, the second biggest after ICF, International Coach Federation, and also author of, I don't know, numerous books related to neurolinguistic programming and coaching, etc., etc. So I do remember myself when I was educated in NLP 2007, I was already reading, Joseph, I was reading your books already at that time, and yeah, it's fascinating. I'm very happy to have you here with us. Thank you for joining.
That's good to be here, Alex. Thanks for inviting me. Are people able to see this background that I'm?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, definitely.
It's
well,
I wish I was on this beach in Bali. It's where I should have been in April if the pandemic hadn't struck. So I use this background as a kind of reminder. At least I can be there virtually.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, technology helps us in many, many ways. And I don't know, to be honest, what we would do if we would be locked down without any technological possibility, to connect and, to share our experiences with others. I think the psychological probably impact would be so much more damaging.
Yeah, sure. We'd have to read. We'd be reading books.
True.
And using the old telephone. Yeah. Yeah.
So today's topic, I just want to kind of set a little bit the foundation or agenda. Today's topic, which I would like, and I invited you to talk, is about how to handle fear and uncertainty. And recently, literally a few days ago, I checked a number of your books you've written, and one of the books exactly have the same topic. Free yourself from fear with NLP. And so it's kind of quite a coincidence. I think it was published in 2001. And I know that recently you wrote a number of books already like updated versions. And one of the recent one is the coaching, the brain, actually like a neuroscience research and neuroscience foundation of coaching and NLP. I would like, if it's possible, could you please share to us how that topic, for example, fear and uncertainty and anxiety evolved over the years?
Okay. Overview then. I got interested in NLP, which is basically the study of the structure of subjective experience. In other words, our subjective experience isn't just random. It has some structure. We can understand it, and we can replicate things that we do well, and we can also replicate things that we do badly. So it's good to know both and how we do them. NLP is a fascinating area. And from that, I've went on to coaching, because coaching is a great focused place to use NLP and other approaches. So now I work as an executive coach mostly, and as a coach trainer and consultant. What's been interesting for me is that if I go back to NLP and the study of the structure of subjective experience, we take our subjective experience for granted, but it's produced by this amazing organ, which happens to be located in our head, but is supported by our whole body. I always say the brain is embodied. You're not just talking about a brain on a stick, it's a whole person. But the brain is a fascinating, it's fascinating how you can connect what happens in the brain with our subjective experience. And it's made me think of the brain as an organ for translating or changing or making experience into nervous tissue. Our brain kind of takes in our experience, converts it into nervous tissue, and that nervous tissue then prepares us to have more experience, hopefully different and better experience. It's the idea of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to change itself in response to what we do and also what we think. And this is also what's been fascinating for me as well, that thought, completely immaterial, changes our brain, which is material. I think that's an amazing concept. And that's why there is a picture of the candle and the lit candle on the book. The image of the candle and the flame. The flame is the consciousness. The candle is the brain. You don't get one without the other. They go together, and yet they're completely different dimensions. So that's what got me interested in terms of backing subjective experience with neuroscience, because I think that there's an awful lot of, let's put it this way, psychology that does not have good backing in research. And I think it's important that if we're going to use models in coaching or psychology, that they are well backed in neuroscientific research. And heaven knows neuroscientific research has come on amazingly in the last 10, 20 years. I mean, it's just incredible how much more we know about the brain than we did 20 years ago. And that should, and this is what I want, translate into knowing more about ourselves and being able to live better and more happily and without all those anxieties and difficulties and stresses that come together with living. So that's the kind of big picture. The book you mentioned, Free Yourself from Fear, I always thought that that title is not quite right, because there's two kinds of fear. One is the real fear, as it were. You are under a real threat. You know, there is somebody in a dark alley who is going to attack you, something like that, you know, or your house is on fire or something. You do not want to get rid of that fear. That fear is absolutely important. It's there to save your life, yeah, and certainly can do. All emotions are there to help. You know, there's no such thing as an emotion that doesn't have some way of helping you, even the ones that don't feel so good.
Yeah.
So you have that fear, and evolution has put fear there basically to make sure that you run when you should and save your life. However, and the fear, of course, is driven by the very evolutionary primitive parts of the brain, particularly a bit called the amygdala, which is at the bottom of the brain. And the amygdala is very sensitive to any kind of threat. And it has its own pathway direct from the eyes. It's like you can react in fear to something without really understanding what it is, because it has a direct pathway. It's so important. And the amygdala is that part of the brain that will make you feel afraid and anxious. Now, also, we have this amazing prefrontal cortex part, the kind of CEO, the planner part of our brain, the conscious part, the one that seems to not exactly create, but we most associate with being conscious. Mm-hmm. Now, we can, our prefrontal cortex has an amazing property, and that is the ability to time travel. We can go back into the past and we can experience the past, we can associate into it in psychological NLP terms, and we can feel emotions that we felt then by kind of being back there. We can then also time travel into the future, which has not yet happened, therefore we have to create it. And what can easily happen, and we all do it, is we time travel into a bad future. We time travel into a future where everything is going wrong, where we're ill or things are bad are happening, or we've lost property or money or work, or because it hasn't happened, because it's all in our fantasy, we can create something that is absolutely terrible. Now, the amygdala doesn't really know the difference between what's happening for real and what's happening in the brain, because what's happening for real is translated into electrical signals in the brain. Therefore, we're under threat. Therefore, we feel anxious. Therefore, we feel stressed. So this is something that we can do to ourselves quite easily. Time travel into the future, stress and become anxious about something that hasn't happened and adversely affect our health. And here's the kicker, when we become anxious and our amygdala is activated, it makes us even less able to think clearly and concisely with our prefrontal cortex. And therefore, the very resources that we need to think clearly and to counteract the possible threat, we don't do so well. And that's a kind of vicious circle. And that's quite easy to fall into. And I think it's very important to be able to have strategies to stop that, to make yourself less likely to go into that, to stop it if you do it, and to make sure that you take appropriate action to ensure that these bad futures don't happen. Now, those I call fake fears, because they're not in the present moment. There's a threat, perhaps, that something might happen. But, you know, I don't know about you, but I can get extremely anxious about an upcoming dental appointment. Right? Well, and so much so that when the time comes, I even consider whether to go or not. And which is crazy.
I can relate.
Yeah, I think most people can. So, you know, this
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question, Joseph. Is it okay? If it's okay, I'm just curious, because you just said that, which I totally understand, that there are no emotions which we supposed to kind of label as a negative and dismiss, because there are behind those emotions, there is always some kind of positive intention, or at least something which in NLP, I remember, we call it positive intention. And when we are jumping into the future, I would say the bad future, it kind of probably obvious what positive intention of that activity is. It's like probably we're supposed to prevent those events, or somehow it's supposed to be some kind of action. Is there anything else kind of I am missing? Is there any other positive intention behind that kind of strategy which we develop, jumping into the bad future and live it, even though it hasn't happened yet?
No, I think that's fair summing up. I mean, it's a remarkable faculty to be able to scenario plan into the future. You know, it's just amazing that we can do this. But of course, the brain works either way. You know, you can use that faculty to time travel into great futures or into very bad futures. The brain doesn't care. It's all electrical signals to the brain. So it's up to us. I think what I would say, which is very important, building on your positive intention. Okay, so the positive intention would be, this is what I don't want to happen.
Yeah.
But as we know, the moment you frame goals in a negative way, you get stuck and you focus too much on what you don't want rather than what you do want.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that some kind of planning to avoid difficult futures is not in order. I think it is. But what's the most important point here, I think, is to not dwell on the fantasy future, but to come back into the present and say, what action steps do I take right now to ensure that, well, first of all, this future doesn't happen. And secondly, this future, which is the good one, which I want, does happen. All right. So that's the important point. Action in the present, and action in the present will take you away from those sort of ruminations.
Well, that sounds like a very practical advice. I mean, as soon as we catch ourselves or able to catch ourselves dwelling or imagining or jumping into the future, which is not very nice, there is a point where we're supposed to say, okay, I got the point. So that's, you know, getting back to the present and start developing some kind of action plan, or get out of that problematic zone, as you say. Okay, I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit. I think Mark Twain said that I had some kind of life of full of terrible events, but majority of them never happened, or something. Yeah, something along those
Yeah,
lines.
that's right. I've been afraid of many things in my life, most of which never happened. I think he wrote, or he's supposed to have wrote. Mark Twain is a writer where everybody dumps these wonderful sayings on, and he may or may not have said it, but it's a good one. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so practical advice. How to like if I would jump into the practicalities, because the idea of this talk is that people maybe who do not have NLP or psychological education, I mean, they would get some practical kind of advices or at least strategies which they might at least try. So how can I, the problem is that when I am dwelling on those bad feelings and imagining those futures, somehow I kind of I'm not always able to catch myself that I'm doing it. I already feel very bad. I mean, in terms of all my somatics already involved into the bad situation, and then maybe I could realize that what am I doing? But kind of a little bit, I feel like a little bit too late. I already feel depressed, and bad. So I have two questions to you. How can I catch myself on a as early stages as possible? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I do, but there's no magic bullet here. It's not like, oh, do this and wow, I'm suddenly free from anxiety and everything else. We all have mental chatter, what we would call mental chatter. And there's a part of our brain called the default mode network. And this is the part that kind of chunters along when we're not doing anything, when we're kind of chilling out and daydreaming. Our brain's always doing something. And unfortunately, this kind of default network doesn't much care about action, doesn't much care about goal focus. It's all about me. So it's very easy to fall into that sort of thing, either building castles in the air or building prisons in the air through the default mode network. Castles are fine, you can have a nice time there. But if you want to stop yourself getting caught in those mental chatter that takes you down, you have to practice stopping yourself. There's no other way. That's the way the brain works. You pay attention, you stop, and you do something else, because that way you can make neuroplastic changes in the brain. So if you imagine like a path, if you're used to going into the future and kind of getting anxious about it, that path is well trodden as a metaphor in brain terms. In other words, the connections between the neurons in the brain are quite literally stronger. Those nerve cells connect with each other, and you fire one and it leads down, and before you know it, you're
I heard the term wired together.
Yeah, what fires together, wires together. It's called Hebb's law. And basically it's exactly that. If you do one thing followed by another, those neurons in the brain will connect. And the more you do it, the stronger they'll connect. And so it goes. It's the Chinese saying, isn't it? Habits begin as cobwebs, but they end as chains.
Seems like it become easier and easier to get into that zone, whatever it is, whatever zone practiced, black one or white one.
It's hard at the beginning. It's like anything, making a new habit. But I think the key is a habit. Once you make a habit, it's easy. The problem is getting to make the new habit when you're pushing against those connections that are already flowing downhill. You've got to kind of push against them at first. That's where the energy is. First of all, you've got to be aware of it. You've got to say, oh, here I go again. Secondly, you've got to stop it, pay attention and stop it. And third, you do something else. And every time you do that, you will weaken the connections in the brain that head off towards the bad scenarios. And you'll strengthen the connections in the brain that stop you doing that and move on to doing something different. And once you build the habit of that, then it's easy. Then it's much, much easier to do.
So the habit actually, like the habit is noticing or become aware and do something else. You said do something else, but what exactly, like what would you recommend to do? Because stop, I think for me, for example, I was thinking for me it would be easy actually to do something, not just stop, because stop, well, I cannot stay in the stop for long. I mean, it's like, I suppose to do something.
Sure.
It feels
Sure.
easier. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just break a habit. You have to replace it with something else. But the point is, with any habit, first of all, you have to have that moment of attention and insight, because if you don't, it'll just carry you down without you realizing it. You know, it's the old saying, there's a lot of trains of thought go by, but we don't have to get on them all, right?
Yeah.
Because if we get on a train of thought, suddenly we're, 2 miles down the line in a bad place and we forgot, we don't even remember getting on the train. So attention, first of all, then, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to change. And it's interesting, again, neuroplasticity, in other words, making changes in the brain, one of the most important things that strengthens neuroplasticity is attention. You've got to pay attention to what you do. When you do something over and over again without attention, it has not very much effect on the neuroplasticity and the connections. If you do it with attention, it has a huge effect. And I can vouch for this. When I was a professional guitarist, I knew that if I practiced for half an hour, absolutely paying attention to everything that I was doing, I would get far better, far quicker than if I just rushed off an hours of practice going through the motions, thinking of something else. Just doesn't translate. So attention first, as you say. So you're stopping doing something, but exactly as you say, what are you going to do? Well, in one sense, it doesn't matter as long as it's positive. Go and have a cup of tea, read a book, go out
Anything.
to the open air, anything really. But something that's valuable, something that connects you with what's important to you, I think would be the main thing.
At the same time, breaking the old pattern. Yeah. I see.
Just a moment of awareness and pause. 4 deep breaths, concentrating on your breathing and not concentrating on, as soon as I get rid of these 4 deep breaths, then I can go back to thinking about what I'm going to do. It doesn't work at all. But just a few deep breaths, because again, the body changes the brain. You take in deep breaths, you change your metabolism, you change how your brain works. It works better with more oxygen. So that's one thing. Second thing, and this is more long-term now, is to have some kind of mindfulness meditation practice. Because if you practice mindfulness meditation, that's exactly what you're doing. You're practicing looking at your trains of thought and not jumping on them. So then, just by doing that, it's automatically practicing on when trains of thought come along. You don't automatically jump on them. You go, do I want to jump on this train or not? I don't think so. So it makes life a lot easier. It also has a lot of other things about it. It will dampen the default mode network. There's good research on this, mindfulness meditation. It also strengthens the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, so that the prefrontal cortex can reframe and apply reason, as it were, to the amygdala when it gets all upset and, whoa, what are we going to do? Just a minute, let's think about this as a challenge. Who can help us, etc., etc. And so the connections are strengthened. So it does a lot of things, but in particular, it does, I think, make us able to stop those sorts of jumping on the trains of thought that lead us bad places.
Jumping on a train. I mean, again, in my words, I would call it like not identifying yourself with. Is it correct? Like dissociate or somehow be able to notice. It means that you're actually separate from thoughts. You are not. Yeah,
you are, absolutely.
And I was also curious that if we will continue to practice, because I come across one of the terms during our previous conversations, and you mentioned several times about like anti-fragile? I mean, what we are aiming as a result to be or to become through that type of practice? Is it related to that term which you mentioned? Could you please say a few words about that?
I just got interested in this term anti-fragile. It comes from the book by Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragility. Nassim Taleb, some you may know if you're listening, wrote the book on the black swan, which is basically very unusual events happen much more often than we think, and it's a good idea to prepare for them. But it's interesting if we just start with the idea of fragile. Something is fragile if it breaks under stress, and the more fragile it is, the less stress will break it. Yeah. So this goes for whether it's a wine glass or whether it's our own kind of psychology, you know, whether we break down under a stress or not. There's a lot of thinking about make yourself resilient, you know, resiliency, resilient leadership, all of this sort of thing, which is fine. However, resilience is something that resists stress. So it can take a lot of stress, but it will still break in the end. It won't change. Anti-fragile is something that actually changes with stress, that thrives on stress, that uses stress. I love the metaphor of water. You know, you can't stress water. You can't stop it. It just kind of goes round it and changes. Our DNA cannot be fragile because it's bombarded with all sorts of stresses all the time. But what our DNA does is change and adapt so that it actually can become better with epigenetic changes. So this idea of anti-fragile then is something that takes a stress and goes, okay, how can this be used to make me stronger?
Well, your words kind of resonate with me in a very specific way. First of all, the water you mentioned kind of many times in martial arts mentioned kind of one of the substance which fascinate everyone and you cannot really win over or fight with. And Aikido or any other martial arts, they are trying to adapt. And I remember the first quote I received in the first day of lockdown from my wife. She sent me the Charles Darwin quote that not the strongest and not the smartest or the most intelligent will survive. The one who can adapt. And it seems like being able to adapt kind of much more closer term than resilience, closer to the anti-fragility kind of idea, right?
Exactly. Charles Darwin is interesting because he's usually quoted as survival of the fittest. You know, everybody says Darwin, survival of the fittest. Well, that's not really what he said. It was more like survival of the fittingest. In other words, the ones that fit in to the environment and context, exactly as you said. In other words, the ability to adapt is the ones that will survive. And that's how, you know, human beings have come to be top of the food chain, because we haven't, you know, grown the strength and the specialization of many animals. We've always kept it, you know, fairly kind of general, and then moved along with and adapted to the environment and been where we are. And that's exactly what, you know, right now when we have this very strong stressor as a pandemic, it's exactly those very specialist just-in-time types of industrial chains that are hit the hardest. They're very fragile. Whereas the ones that are redundant, like, you know, lots of redundancy built into the system, like the internet, are doing very well, thank you.
Yeah. So if you would recommend, like, what kind of practice, we right now, well, defined, I believe, quite simple steps. Simple, I don't mean, well, simple maybe to define them. It does not necessarily mean that simple to create a new habit. It's going to take energy. It's going to take time, for sure. And for different people, maybe, you know, it will be more difficult or less difficult. But what we are aiming as a result, how you would see like ideal habit And do you have it, by the way, do you have that habit yourself?
I have some habits, certainly, which I think are very important. One is meditation. The other is making sure that I get good quality sleep, which is really, really, really important.
Rest. Yeah.
Because you go without sleep and it sensitizes the amygdala straight away. So anything is going to make you more anxious. So sleep is really important. Exercise is really important too. I've missed the gym. But in terms of kind of building an anti-fragile, it's like, okay, so there are certain things that you can't do. And, you know, I would love to have been in Bali doing a training. I haven't. So I've had to look and see what else I can do and what sort of opportunities have opened up as a result of the pandemic, rather than saying, oh, you know, I can't do this, therefore I've had it. So it's always good to have some kind of redundancy in your life. In some, if I can't do this, well, I can do that. You know, if I can't do that, well, I've always got that. May not be
Deliberately searching for the I would say opportunities or bright side of things, whatever things are.
Okay. Yeah, but not kind of Pollyanna, not like always look on the bright side of life. But you know, bad things happen, absolutely. And I'm not saying they're not, and I'm not saying that this pandemic hasn't had remarkably bad consequences for many people. It's a tragedy. However, as you know, life goes on, and we have to do the best we can, and therefore we have to be the best we can. So I think in terms of building this kind of anti-fragility, if you like, I think there's a number of things we can do. Briefly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. You know, try different things. It's a way of building that redundancy. I've tried many things, certainly, and lost money on a lot of things. But at the same time, if I hadn't kept trying different things, I wouldn't have found the things that eventually did very well for me. Thank you very much. So I think making mistakes is important, as long as they're different mistakes. You know, don't make the same mistake more than once. I think that's the basic advice here.
Recommendation.
Yeah, recommendation. Make mistakes, but always different ones. That way you'll always be learning. If you make
Sounds easy, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, learn from the mistakes. So that would be one thing. And of course, once you do that, you're immediately coming away from that anxiety, because that's what usually stops people from making the, you know, supposing this goes wrong is a question you can ask. And if you ask it and pay attention to it, you never do anything. You know, you go, supposing this goes right. If this goes wrong, then it's not going to be the end of the world, because I can do this and I can do this, and then I'm going to do this. So I've got it all planned out. I know what I'm going to do, and here we go. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. So that's one thing. I think another thing is to continue to be curious. I think that goes with making mistakes.
Oh yeah. Keep
up the curiosity, because curiosity is one of those things that sits above all the other things that we do.
Well, to try new things, you definitely need to be curious, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you don't. You know, so you keep curious. I think that gratitude is really important. I think gratitude is an amazing emotion. It kind of centers you, and it allows you to be in the moment and to feel good about what you have, because you know, we all have. If we're living in the Western world, we all have pretty good amenities in life, and there's lots of things that we can be grateful for. Sure, bad things happen, of course, but I think with gratitude you can kind of center yourself, and you can use that to think, okay, well, I've got a lot. Yeah. Okay. So I've lost some things here, and this is bad. However, I have got a lot, and I can also remember bad things that happened in the past when I've got over them. And also I can remember when bad things have happened, and I've actually, a year or so later, I've said, thank God, you know, I'm really glad that happened. It taught me such a lot. I would never have done this otherwise.
This is true.
I'm not recommending global shutdown for anything, but it's just a state of mind. You know, we don't have control over global shutdowns and viruses and pandemics. We only have influence on our own thinking and our own emotions. That's all we can do.
All our reactions.
And I think one more, and that's saying no to things. I think that it's very easy to get dragged into saying yes to too many things, saying yes to things that aren't important, and this doesn't leave you with any bandwidth. It doesn't leave you with any redundancy. You're overcommitted. I think the ability to say, no, thank you, I don't want to do this right now, but thank you for asking, is a very, very important thing. And rather than, it's like, what are you going to say no? Make sure you say no to things. Okay, you're going to say yes to things, but it's important also to focus on things that you're not going to do.
I'm just curious, especially about that particular point, because I find myself involved into the really lots of different projects. I'm just curious, what would be, from your point of view, the best foundation for no? Like, is it self-care? Is it some kind of self-care? Is it, what kind of belief would support a strong no?
I think it's self-care, in the sense of the, when you go on an airplane, something that I haven't done for some time, but I'm looking forward to it again, hopefully. When you sit on the airplane, you get the safety briefing. If oxygen fail, blah, 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 then oxygen masks will drop from the ceiling. Put on your own mask before helping somebody else. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not okay, you're going to pass out and you won't be able to help other people. And this is very much so for anyone in a helping profession, certainly coaches. You've got to take care of yourself, because unless you do, you're not going to be effective in helping other people. So we all deserve to do the things that are important to us, and to take care of ourselves and also take care of other people. And this is going to mean saying no to some things. And the more effective person you are, of course, the more you'll get asked. It's the old story, isn't it? If you want something done well, ask the busiest person, because they're the ones that are doing so well.
Very much. Yeah.
That's right. So it's about self-care. I think that's well summed up.
Well, you mentioned quite a number already things which I am sure people can take on. And it will require probably a little bit of thinking and planning, because to have good habits in those areas, to habit about saying no, or habit about kind of taking care of yourself, or habit about having good sleep, and all those things seems like small ones, but I believe there is some kind of accumulative effect of all those things. And as a result, maybe that's the way how we could eventually arrive to anti-fragile, power, I would say.
Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. You've got to start sometime, but why not now? First step starts now, and you keep stepping, and it's remarkable how far you come. You don't even have to think about it. Just keep walking.
Perfect. Well, if it's okay with you, probably we will be wrapping up our talk. I'd like to ask you maybe one small thing. If you would choose, if for example, if you would have or do not have a strong habits in those areas, which one you would like to start first?
In which areas? The one that I've...
we mentioned number of habits which would lead people to less anxiety, less fear, and more anti-fragile kind of, the power. So which one you would choose, or I would say like a prioritize, and to have a priority number one habit?
I don't know. I think habits are synergistic. I'm not sure you can, they're a kind of system. I'm not sure you can have a number one. And I also think...
Or where to start?
Start by looking at your own mental chatter, I think. The mental chatter, the trains of thought that lead you off into bad places. Absolutely. That's one thing that you can do all the time. A second thing that you can do is to start to adjust your sleeping patterns if you know that they're not serving you well. And the third thing you can do is to start even a very short practice of mindfulness, 5 minutes, 10 breaths, 15 breaths, whatever it is, because it'll pay off. It may not seem like very much, but it'll pay off. And you know, it's all work in progress. I wish I could say I was master of my mental chatter, but I'm absolutely not. But I catch it much sooner than I used to.
Yeah, I could say the same about me as well. I mean, it's not easy task to quiet your mind, but it gets better over practice. This is true.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and I hope it's not our last conversation. There are lots of topics, and there are lots of issues people right now having troubles with, and I would love to, have your opinion and your advice on those areas. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Alex. Been great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.